D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
An audio drama by the Intergalactic Improv Initiative.
Strategic Displacement, or Lead You Home. Written by Kaya Renwick and featuring the voices of Dan Spitaliere, Leah Ryan, and J.D. Kelly. Home is where you choose to go together. But sometimes, the universe has other ideas.
1142 hours, October 19th, 2186. Terran Universal Coordinated Calendar. Tuchanka, Aralax System. Krogan DMZ. Somewhere underground.
We're lost.
We are not lost.
We are definitely lost.
We are strategically displaced.
Garrus's raised brow plate was only visible thanks to the glow from his visor. The lights on his and Shepard's hard suits faintly sketched their forms in the dark, but otherwise, apart from the flashlights on their Omni-tools, which they were using very sparingly, they existed in pitch black.
That is the most bullshit euphemism I've ever heard you say. Strategically displaced? That sounds more like a politician covering their ass than a veteran N7 operative who's seen.
Shh! He snapped his mouth and mandibles shut as Shepard's hissing shh cut through the repartee. They froze in place, one eye on their motion detectors and the other searching for any hint of movement. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Shepard took a cautious step forward, a collection of tiny lights floating in nothing.
Thought I heard skittering. Rachni skittering.
Whew, spirits. Those things were bad enough before the Reapers got their hands on them. Claws, eldritch synthetic tentacles, whatever.
Hey man, come on. We gotta keep moving.
He fell in on her 6, in his familiar spot 2 strides behind and 1 to the side. The weight of his mantis was comforting on his back, but he couldn't say the same about the Argus he was holding at the ready. It was hardly his preferred rifle, but the Faiston he'd come to love during his time back with the Hierarchy was up in orbit, having acid damage repaired after that nightmare on Utuku. Not that this nightmare was much better. They were supposed to be moving through the ancient ruins of Tuchanka, on the way to deal with the Reaper destroyer that stubbornly insisted on blocking their path to the Spire. He, Shepard, and James had split off from Wrex, Eve, and Mordin when things had gone haywire the first time, a move which he already hadn't liked, but which had been dictated by the unfortunate realities of the Tuchanka Department of Infrastructure. They'd been exploring the frankly fascinating ruins for all of 10 minutes when something had rumbled under their feet like the crowd at an Aroan Suncats Hele game turned up to 7, and the ground had given way in a landslide of crumbling stone. James had done his best to catch them, but he'd had to scramble back to avoid a huge chunk of falling rock. 45 seconds later, Garrus and Shepard had tumbled to a stop, battered and dusty but luckily unhurt. They hadn't even lost their weapons in the fall. Thank the spirits for maglocks. They had ended up in some spirits-forsaken level of the Krogan catacombs, with the next best thing to no light and absolutely no map to speak of. They were also underneath enough solid rock that their comms were having trouble getting signals to the surface. There was no way to go but up. That much was simple. Unfortunately, they had already heard 3 Reaper ground troop patrols over their heads, and there'd been 2 more smaller rock slides since they started up the way they'd come. After the second, which had required Shepard's cybernetically enhanced strength to shove them both out of the way and into an alcove, Shepard had declared they would no longer try to climb the pile of scree they'd brought down with them. They would make their way through the ancient tunnels of the buried city instead. And now, of course, they were hopelessly lost. Garrus squared his shoulders and followed his CO and girlfriend further into the darkness.
No need to worry. We get into and out of hopeless situations all the time. This is just another Tuesday.
Shepard ran her tongue over her teeth again. grounding herself with a taste of the grit that somehow managed to sneak past her kinetic barrier filter every time she visited Tuchanka. It tasted the way a Varen smelled, i.e. not pleasant, and it was a great way to distract herself from how thoroughly fucked they were. They'd fallen well below ground level. She hadn't bothered downloading maps with anything resembling a y-axis because there'd been no plan to go into the catacombs. No, scratch that. She hadn't known there were catacombs. At least she'd had maps while poking around the Prothean ruins of Theros. She'd gotten herself and Garrus stuck in some godforsaken ancient Krogan tomb. They were far enough down that she'd be willing to bet the rooms here had been part of the pre-nuclear civilization. She kept expecting to turn a corner and find the Krogan equivalent of a fax machine. They had to get to the surface, but the debris that had fallen with them had been too loose to crawl back up. They'd gotten unbelievably lucky in the initial fall to have had no injuries. She wasn't willing to risk a second fall. While it made giving orders simple, Shepard hated only having one option. And until they were close enough to the surface for a comm signal to get through, the only option was find a way up, ideally without dying in the process. As much as she'd have liked to hope that the team on the surface was spooling a really long rope down to them, there wasn't time for the Normandy to mount a rescue op. Not yet. Not while the Reapers were rampaging across Tuchanka and threatening the structural integrity of the Spire. Mordin needed to get there, needed to disperse the cure. That was what she was supposed to be doing, not going spelunking in Wrex's backyard.
Wouldn't that be ironic? The great Commander Shepard and the Vigilante Archangel buried in 3 millennia of Krogan ruins before they could take down the Reapers. I really hope the crew's just gotten on with it and they come back for us later.
Commander Shepard did not, as a rule, yelp. Such ignoble interjections did not form part of a strong, courageous leader's battlefield vocabulary. A shouted curse was about the worst you'd hear out of her when she was in professional mode. That was why the only warning Garrus had, apart from the renewed crumbling of rocks and gravel, was a surprised,
Shit! Shepard!
Garrus flung himself forward, onto his stomach, reaching with one hand and anchoring himself with the other. Even in the dark, he knew where she'd be. 2 steps ahead and 1 to the side, and she'd throw her hand up automatically if she was falling. The angle was wrong. Her gauntleted hand slipped through his talons, and his hand landed on sliding gravel.
No, fuck, no.
He scrambled to the edge of where she'd just been and turned his omni-tool flashlight on full blast. They'd been reserving their hardsuit batteries, but losing Shepard was extenuating circumstances. The light washed across an expanse of tan rocks and gravel with a slight depression in the middle. A few tiny rocks settled in toward the center as he watched. A flick of his wrist created a spade out of his omni-tool. He spiked it into the gravel and started digging. Shepard's helmet would be far enough down that he'd find her arms before her head, and either way, the blade wouldn't immediately pierce her hardsuit. There was loss, and there was lost. He could not lose Shepard. Everything was very, very dark and very, very still. Shepard's vision filled with sparks and curves of color as her brain fought to process the void. She'd thought it had been dark before. This was a whole other can of worms. The hallucinations her brain was throwing up looked altogether too much like blurred stars and a ship on fire for her heart rate to even consider calming down. But calm down she must, because even if she wasn't over Alkera, she would still run out of oxygen if she wasn't careful. She counted breaths. In, hold, out, coast. 4s all around. Count, count, count.
Shepard 5923 Alpha Charlie 2826 Staff Commander Military Vocational Code A4 and 7. Okay, you're okay. You're okay.
She closed her eyes, then opened them again, just so she could be sure they were open. Her HUD flickered on. Low power. Her shields had taken a beating when she'd fallen into whatever she'd fallen into, so much so that they were currently inactive. Her hard suit had suffered a fault, and the onboard computer had reset. It was running diagnostics now, both on itself and on her. That part still unsettled her. She'd started donning her armor in her cabin during the Cerberus days, and she'd kept up the habit. Long-haul hard suits had always slotted into the human body in ways nobody liked to think about, but the hard suits she wore now went a sight further. She hadn't even let Garrus watch yet, and nobody else cleaned her armor but her. Shepard firmly set aside the distracting thoughts. Now was not the time. Her HUD informed her that the structural integrity of her suit was at 87% and holding, but her shield capacitors had failed, and every attempt to restart her shields had failed. Based on the ambient pressure readings and her complete inability to move, she had a feeling she knew why. She hadn't just fallen further down. She'd fallen into a solid pit of gravel. Her shields wouldn't start up again until they had space to do so. Her arms were above her head. Gravel had filled in around them. She couldn't tell how far down she'd fallen, or how much loose rock was above her. Her breathing sped up, and her heart rate rose to match. For a second, she felt like she was floating inside her body, as detached from the pattering in her chest as she was from the number in the corner of her HUD that represented it. Something rumbled through the dirt and rock around her, and the self-protective dissociation vanished.
Eve mentioned these were the grounds of a thresher maw. A really, really big thresher maw.
Alcara's fire and ice morphed in sick, twisting color into Akuza's prefab shelters. The burning lack of oxygen in her lungs became the sizzle and hiss of acid eating through her armor. Her HUD flashed a bright red warning at her. Her heart and resp rate were dangerously high.
Seek medical attention immediately.
Yeah. I'll get right on that.
Her hands began to tingle as the flashback and panic attack started in earnest. She couldn't move, and she only had the oxygen in her suit. She couldn't calm out to the Normandy because they were too far away. She was going to die in a gravel pit in the ruins of Tuchanka, and she was going to abandon Garrus in those very same ruins because she hadn't thought to check for environmental hazards on the ground in the dark.
Oh shit! Garrus!
She realized only after another trio of speeding heartbeats that she'd spoken aloud.
Oh, thank the spirits you're alive. Don't worry, I'm coming to get you.
As had proven to be the case on so many nights since Mene, his voice cut through the memories and brought her back to the present. Her breathing stabilized and her heart slowed, and a moment later, the warning light stopped flashing.
You hurt?
No. Stuck, though. I can't move at all. Shields are down, too.
I'm digging as fast as I can. Hang in there.
Damn. Here I was, thinking about taking a walk.
The joke was feeble, but he chuckled anyway. Omniblades were definitely made for slicing, dicing, and stabbing, not for digging. Still, where there was a will, there was a way, and between his Omni-tool and the butt of his rifle, Garrus made a dent in the Scrabble burying Shepard in good time. When he finally unearthed her right hand, the sight of it sticking up from the loose rock made his stomach turn. He'd seen too many disembodied hands poking out of piles of scrap or mounds of dirt in the last 4 months to not instinctively think the worst, and it wasn't made better by the fact that her hand twitched soon after he'd freed it. His brain supplied an image of her hand crawling across the gravel to attack him, and he had to close his eyes and swallow hard. Upon opening his eyes again, she was waving.
Gonna pull me out, big guy?
He carefully braced himself on the edge of the pit and reached to grab her hand.
I wish manufactured rope wasn't shit. I'm strong, but you're solid.
A lady's weight? is hardly polite conversation. Didn't your mother teach you that?
Not really. That was my aunt's domain. Mom mostly taught me strategy and tactics.
Every time you tell me something about your mom, she sounds cooler.
His laughter faded, and his throat began to ache.
She is. Even cooler than your mom, I think.
Impossible.
Well, we'll just have to get you out of this pit and find out. Ready?
Yep.
He killed the Omnispade, wrapped one hand around Shepard's and the other around her forearm, set his heels in the gravel, and hauled. Garrus collapsed on the side of the pit, and Shepard sprawled on top of him. Their hard suits clacked together, and dust rose in motes, illuminated briefly by their running lights.
Spirits, I swear you weigh as much as a shuttle.
Romantic, Vakarian.
You don't seem inclined to move, much less complain.
I wonder why.
It had taken the better part of 15 minutes to work Shepard out of the pit. Luckily, the loose spot she'd fallen into kept refilling with the gravel she dislodged, so she didn't sink back down every time he had to adjust his grip. But the going had been slow and difficult, between how heavy she was and how little purchase he had. They laid there for a moment, just breathing. Shepard, who hadn't dared close her eyes longer than a blink while stuck underground, let her eyelids slide shut and focused on the rise and fall of Garrus's chest. Even with several layers of ablative ceramic plating, force-distributing crystal, and nanofiber weave between them, the movement was familiar and comforting, perhaps in part because of those layers. It still felt strange sometimes to feel his plates against her skin.
You okay?
I'm fine. My shield capacitor might be busted. It still hasn't rebooted after shorting out while I was being buried alive.
It's Tuchanka. I'm sure we can find a spare capacitor on the side of the road. But I'm more concerned about you.
I said I'm okay. Okay?
He tapped the back of her helmet with one talon, then let his fingers rest on its curve.
You know what I mean. And by avoiding the question, you're answering it. Am I prying, or am I leaving this one alone until later?
Shepard focused on her heartbeat until she could give him a genuine response.
I'm okay, Garrus. It was unpleasant for a few minutes, and I'm sure tonight's nightmares are going to be a bumper crop, but I'm actually okay for now.
His grip on the back of her helmet tightened slightly, pressing her head into the scoop of his collar.
I won't pretend it was fun imagining you being buried alive. I really prefer you above ground.
You and me both. Thanks for the save.
Always.
We should keep going.
Any ideas?
Did you happen to sprout wings while I was down there?
Sorry. I'm too busy fighting a losing battle against a bunch of rocks.
Hey. No. You won.
Only because I'm too stubborn to know when I've lost.
Shepard clambered off and helped him to his feet.
Sounds like someone else I know.
Well, I wasn't gonna say it.
$1,352 hours, October 19th, 2186. Terran Universal Coordinated Calendar. Ever so slightly less underground.
I'm starting to get thirsty. That is not a good sign.
You humans. So squishy.
Oh, laugh it up, Garrus. You won't like me when I'm delirious.
I thought your suit recycled water.
Yeah, but it's not perfectly efficient, and recycling does require input.
Shepard approached a wall and scratched it, and hissed under her breath when perfectly dry dust flaked away.
Ugh. Oh, gosh. How do Krogan live here? There's, negative fresh water.
They ship a ton of it in, and they store it in their hubs. Also, they're not allowed to settle anywhere else in communities larger than a few hundred.
Right. The sooner we get that cure deployed, the better.
She raised an eyebrow over her shoulder, even though she knew very well he could only see her turn her head.
What's that for?
His dark green outline shrugged in her visor's night vision.
Sometimes I'm still not convinced this is a good idea. I'll follow you into hell and back, Shepard, don't get me wrong, but on a personal level, I have my doubts.
Shepard's jaw set.
You don't think the Krogan deserve to live? You were in that hospital with me and Mordin. You saw what over 1,000 years of despair has done to them.
Garrus heaved a sigh that buzzed at the edges, which was the closest her aural implants could get to hearing his subvocals. She'd learned that it meant he was stressed or conflicted, and she certainly couldn't blame him in this instance. She also knew that he would never undermine her authority in the field. The only reason this was coming up at all was because he trusted her with everything, his hopes as well as his doubts.
In theory, absolutely. I will admit I bought the party line growing up. In basic, in mandatory service, at CSEC. The Krogan were barbarous, bloodthirsty monsters who fully deserved what we did to them in retaliation for turning up their nose at the Solarians' generosity in uplifting them. But that first day, when you told me off for endangering Dr. Michelle's life and then warned me not to let the ends justify the means, well, it wasn't long before I started questioning the way I thought about other things too, including the genophage. So yes, as a thought exercise, the genophage should be cured. No parent should lose 999 of every 1,000 kids they bring into the world. That breaks a spirit. It can't not. But in practice?
He gestured to the ruins surrounding them.
They destroyed their planet, Shep. And not once in the history of the Krogan have they shown a hint of remorse or a willingness to do things a different way. You have to ask yourself if they have the capacity.
Shepard stopped, turned around, and put her hands on her hips.
You gonna tell that to Wrex when we get back up top? Because I'll buy popcorn and sell tickets.
He laughed, although it came out as more of a cough. It was dry down here.
I'm not saying no individual Krogan can work for a better path, but Wrex is one Krogan. He's good, but he's not that good.
And I'm just one human.
Your point?
Garrus, what are we doing here?
He raised a brow plate.
Trying to get out of a Krogan ruin that's older than our family trees combined?
I mean, the whole war, what are we doing?
Making deals, forging alliances, getting people to fight for... Oh.
There you go.
She punched him in the arm, then turned around and kept walking. They'd found a tunnel that sloped upward and had been following it for the better part of the last hour.
If the past 2 years have proven anything, it's that change only takes one person to start it. In those last 2 years, Wrex has been doing what no other Krogan has done before, and it's working. Clans are uniting behind his banner, and not only because the Reapers are the biggest, baddest fight since the Rachni Wars. Any other time in history, a Krogan warlord's gotten the idea to expand his influence. It's been through violence and for violent ends. Wrex has smashed a few heads, sure, but he's won more clans to his side through negotiation than combat, and those ties are holding strong. His reforms are taking root and spreading. If ever there was a time to support the Krogan race rebuilding itself, it's now. And if not now, when? There may not be another opportunity, Garrus. If that's the case, this can only bolster the war effort, and it won't matter how risky it is to galactic balance in the end.
That's a lot darker than anything you've said in the war room.
Shepard didn't reply.
1521 hours, October 19th, 2186. Terran Universal Coordinated Calendar. Yep, still underground.
Shepard's HUD told her they'd ascended several hundred meters since they began. That didn't seem to make a lick of difference when it came to seeing where they were going, and it didn't take into account the distance they'd traveled away from their original drop point. Even if, no, when, they returned to the surface, they'd have a significant hike to find any Allied forces. Assuming, of course, that they weren't overrun by Reaper ground troops beforehand. They'd fought off a couple of small incursions, a Ravager here, a handful of husks there. From behind a pile of rubble, they'd picked off half a dozen cannibals who had been more interested in consuming the mess of unidentifiable corpses than worrying about what was felling their friends. Luckily, they hadn't encountered any brutes, which suggested the tunnels between here and the surface weren't big enough for the hulking beasts. Nor had they run into any marauders, which made Shepard think these were stray troops that had become separated from their units, or strategically displaced. She worked her tongue against the roof of her mouth in an attempt to muster up some saliva. It had been less than 4 hours since they'd taken their tumble, according to her HUD's chronometer. Still, the aridity and the ambient heat, even this far down, was drying her out faster than her suit's recyclers could keep up.
Thane would love it here.
Shepard? What's so funny?
Thane would love it here. It's so hot and dry. Why didn't the Drell relocate to Tuchanka instead of Kaji? They'd have been so much happier.
Well, I imagine the abundance of warmongering dinosaurs had something to do with it. Not to mention the debt of gratitude they owed the Hanar. Now you mention it, they could petition a clan for a spot to build a health spa.
It would have to be an anti-spa, because spas are wet.
Turian spas aren't wet. We have every kind of sand you can imagine. There are also a lot of hot rocks.
Sounds like someone else I know.
Okay, have you finally lost it? I was worried about you when you were getting maudlin a while back, but this is a whole other level.
I smell water.
What? All I smell is dust and rocks. And the acid burn that last Ravager put in my chest plate.
Turians hear better than humans, but humans smell better.
Her words were casual, almost dreamy, but she was already moving away from him in a completely different direction than they'd been going, scaling piles of rubble in movements more reminiscent of Rachni than humans.
I'm not so sure about that.
He clicked his pistol back onto his hip and scrambled after her.
Hey, Shepard! Slow down! We don't know what's over there! Get back! Ah, damn it.
She moved quickly enough that he lost visual contact with her several times, and more than once he called out to urge her to slow down, lest they become even more lost.
Spirits.
She was single-minded, though, and while he normally loved that about her, at the moment it made him question her grip on reality. No way could she smell water. And even if she could, where would that get them? The answer came in a small landslide of rocks as he crested a hill and pushed a hailstorm of gravel and chips of concrete down in front of him. He'd been following her dot on his motion detector as he pushed himself to keep up with her, and hadn't been paying any attention to his surroundings. That made this moment so much better. Shepard's nose had led them to a giant cavern within the ancient ruins. Easily 24 floors had caved in at some point in the distant past, creating an atrium in the middle of what could have been anything from apartments to office buildings. Each level of the roughly circular space was full of archways that led into darkness, almost like they were standing at stage level in a massive theater, looking up at the boxes. That was hardly the most surprising thing about the room, however. No, most surprising was that the walls, columns, and arches were draped in heavy greenery. Waxy leaves, big enough for Tali to use as blankets, hung from vines thicker than Jacob's biceps. The vines wove and braided with one another to create trunks you could drive a Mako up if you were Shepard, and a handful of flowers wide enough to land a shuttle on, stretched in a long vertical line that curved gently around the room. Only one flower was open at the moment, and that was the one closest to the bottom of the room, across the expanse of rubble from them. That rubble was carpeted in olive green moss that had to be a hand's breadth thick, which was speckled with tiny white flowers of its own. Water pooled in the dips in the rubble and moss, and flowed through its valleys in a slow trickle. The gargantuan flower's long, pointed petals shone like mirrors, reflecting the single ray of sunlight that pierced the ceiling high above into a million flickering rainbow points scattered around the unbelievable oasis. The scent in the room was powerful, a combination of rich loam filled with compost and the heavy, sweet perfume of the flower. Garrus couldn't fathom how they hadn't noticed it in the tunnels.
The flowers open as the sun moves.
At his voice, a dozen birds no bigger than his hand, but which still looked more like eldritch spirits than birds, took flight from their hiding places in the tangled vines and sought shelter closer to the ceiling. When he took a step forward, following Shepard further in, 1,000 insects skittered away from his unwelcome intrusion and disappeared into the thick moss. Shepard dropped to her knees beside the biggest pool of water and stuck her armored hand in it. She waited 30 seconds, then shook off the excess water and removed her helmet.
It's safe to drink.
Garrus's brow plates shot up, and his mandibles clenched tight to his jaw. She undoubtedly had sensors in her hands for exactly the sort of survival occasion, but he wasn't sure he'd be able to stomach drinking groundwater from Tuchanka, of all places, even if it had been filtered through more greenery than he'd ever seen in one place on the planet. Shepard surfaced a moment later, face glistening and bangs plastered to her forehead.
That's better. I feel so much more human now.
She sat back on the moss and stared at the spot where the sun peeked in, easily another 100 meters up.
Think we could climb those vines?
Garrus's shoulders sank in relief. The vaguely giddy tone was gone. She was back to her normal self. She'd been right. He didn't like her when she was delirious.
I don't know. They look sturdy enough, but they might not hold our weight. Also, do we want to risk damaging what might be the only damn plant life on the planet?
See if you can raise someone on the comms while I test the flora for durability.
1603 hours, October 19th, 2186. Terran Universal Coordinated Calendar. On top of the ground.
Okay.
40 minutes later, Shepard helped Garrus over the lip of the hole at the top of the room. It was a tight squeeze to get his carapace through, but they managed it. And now they sat in a relatively cool, sheltered stone building that had been gutted at some point over the many centuries of the Krogan's cycle of civilization and destruction. The vines had held, although there had been a couple of close calls, when a foot had slipped, or a stem had yielded a little too much when they pulled and they'd lost their grip. The last leg had been the hardest, since they'd had to shimmy across the ceiling of the huge room, hanging from the thickest vines they could find, and praying that the greenery would hold the ancient ruins together just a little bit longer. Neither had any desire to become reacquainted with the floor, even though the moss might have cushioned their fall. They lay on the stone floor, which was open to the sky, and breathed a deep sigh of relief. Even the dingy brown sky of Tuchanka was welcome, after the darkness they'd spent the better part of their days stuck in. The sound of a Tomka's rumbling engine and its massive tires crunching over loose gravel brought them both upright. Coming to the edge of the building, they waved as Wrex shoved the hatch open and leaned out, cupping a hand to his mouth.
You know, Shepard, if you don't like the way I smell, you can always tell me. No need to get yourselves lost.
Shepard snorted as she scrambled down the crumbling sidewall and hopped up into the Tomka with Garrus on her heels.
We weren't lost, Wrex.
Wrex raised an eyebrow as he smacked the side, signaling the driver to get a move on.
Oh? You got a better word for ending up 4 clicks away from the drop zone?
I believe Shepard called it strategically displaced.
Any excuse for some alone time.
Shepard's laugh was enough to set Garrus's mind at ease. The disquiet that had been growing ever since she'd shown up on Mene, and which had spiked while they'd been underground, was fading. Finding that oasis, that hidden gem of life persevering through and adapting to the harshest conditions, had buoyed her spirits. He had no doubt their impending mission would bring her pause once again, and far too soon for his liking. But for the moment, Shepard was smiling. He'd bring every Reaper in the galaxy down with his bare hands if it meant she'd smile like that. If it meant she was no longer lost, but found. Because it would mean that he was, too.
You have been listening to Strategic Displacement, or Lead You Home, a Mass Effect fanfiction written by Kaya Renwick for the 2025 Vakarian Minibang, featuring the voices of J.D. Kelly as Urdnot Wrex, Leah Ryan as Commander Shepard, Dan Spitaliere as Garrus Vakarian, and Kaya Renwick as everyone and everything else. Sound design by Dan Spitaliere, and original music by Shay Grivet. Music and sound effects are used under Creative Commons or royalty-free licenses. For the extended credits, please see the show notes. For the full text, and for accompanying art by Maria Damianou, please see the link in the show notes to the archive of our own. For more information about the Intergalactic Improv Initiative, please visit ishouldroll.com. Thank you for listening. Have a pleasant day.